higher yields require high-performance crop nutrition. Through fusion technology, MicroEssentials is designed to increase nutrient uptake throughout the growing cycle. The unique chemical composition of MicroEssentials creates an acid zone around each granule. Lowering the pH promotes the formation of dihydrogen orthophosphate, a more readily available form of phosphate, resulting in increased nutrient uptake. With MicroEssentials SZ, plants more efficiently take up zinc because each nutritionally balanced granule delivers zinc evenly across the field. MicroEssentials also contains small elemental sulfur particles designed for faster oxidation to sulfate and increased uptake. The proof is in the performance. Research shows that plants take up nutrients more efficiently with MicroEssentials compared to traditional fertilizer blends, resulting in higher yields and higher profitability.
All right, good afternoon. We're back with our next panel from Farmers National Company. We're going to be talking about managing these evolving times. Our guests from Farmers National Company, Kyle Nelson, Dale Weston, and Eric Skolnis. And we're going to talk all things land and land values and rents and everything like that. Any questions, just raise a hand. We'll get a microphone to you. And you can ask your questions as well. So, it's been a year since we last talked to you guys. What's happened? What's been happening in the land markets?
A lot. Last year I sat up here thinking I was bold in saying that I think we might see the same land value levels that we saw in 2012 and 13, and that turned out to be an understatement. We've blown way past those in many cases, and have continued to see that strength through the summer and even some sales activity this fall. So it's exceeded what we thought a year ago.
The primary service area you guys are providing, you two are out of Fargo and you're out of
Blindon.
Blindon?
Yep.
Okay. And you cover a pretty good footprint out of those areas?
So we basically cover from northwest Minnesota, all of the state of North Dakota, and northeastern South Dakota from our offices.
Yep.
Company-wide, we're in about 30 states. So,
yep. Maybe give us a little history on Farmers National Company, if you can. It's not just land values; it's farm management as well, isn't it?
I'd say, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, go on.
Just try again.
You hear me now?
There you go.
All right. Yeah, so Farmers National Company, we started in 1929. We're an employee-owned company. Our headquarters is based out of Omaha, Nebraska, and we've got regional offices and local offices throughout our footprint. I serve Glendon area. I've been there for 16 years now. My core territory, I guess, would be Minnesota side of the Red River Valley, Crookston and Grand Forks kind of being the northern edge down to Morris and Ortonville, Minnesota area. So I'd say a lot of us, that's a pretty common geography or footprint. So
Dale, how about you guys are in the Fargo area?
Well, in the Fargo office, we handle, Kyle and I, a lot of appraisal and real estate sales work. And the real estate sales can take you out to a broader area. I just listed some land out in McLean County today. Just finishing up a sale up in Renville County up north of Minot. Had a sale here a week or so ago down in Herman, Minnesota. So that would be kind of the region that you would go in. The nice thing about our company, you have a local office, but you have a national presence. So a lot of times we'll visit with other farm managers, real estate agents in totally different areas that might have clients that feel that land prices are too high in their particular area, looking to invest in land, and they'll call up to us and say, hey, do you have anything available up there? You know, how's the capitalization rate and that type of thing. So it really is a collaborative effort between our employees and our business.
Kyle, you mentioned we blew past the expectations of 2012 land values. Can you give us a kind of a background reason why we did that?
Well, I think in 2012 there was some hesitancy, and I think in my opinion back then you had a lot. What was driving things was the thought that the train's leaving the station, I better jump on it and because this thing is going to keep going. And of course, quickly commodity prices, plummeted, and we had a big correction there. This time around, what I see is it's an opportunity-driven market. I think the buyers, they're not looking for deals, they're not expecting deals, they're not expecting the land to escalate, that it's going to be worth 10% more next year, 10% more the following year. It's opportunity, and now is the opportunity. There's a lot of cash in people's pockets, there's a lot of wherewithal. So as I see it, that's what's driving things now. And the result, and the reason why I say that is I see results that I've used the word chaotic. They're all over, and they don't necessarily correlate specifically to land quality in any given sense. And to me, that gets at the opportunity aspect. And then the other component is a lot of this land is selling via public auction, and it's selling live or online or both. And you end up with some factors there that create some random results, I guess is the simple way to put it, that don't necessarily correlate to quality in all cases.
Sure. The age of the average farmer, they're all going to be my age where they're starting to think about retirement within 3, 4, 5 years. Does that influence this as well?
You know, what I've noticed with the age of the farmer is some of our sales that we've had that have been extremely strong, they might have a son or daughter coming into the farm operation. And with some of the lower interest rate environment with USDA lending, we'll see a father, mother maybe purchase the land, and within a few months we'll see another deed transferring the land to the child once they've secured that funding. And so we see a lot of that going on right now. It's, again, like Kyle said, and I agree with that 100%. It's opportunity this time, where in 2012, 2013, it was, I'm going to get what I can, get on the train, as he said. But, our commodity markets really have been stronger for a longer period this time. We had the election a couple of years ago where there was just a lot of ad hoc government money that came out. There's just another payment, the ERP payment that just came out. There's a lot of what I would call dry powder out there for people that they want to buy land. Land tends to be a bit of a safety blanket and a hedge against inflation, a hedge against a recession. And so now the farmer might be bidding or competing against investor buyers that feel the same way about that.
I was going to ask that. Who is buying the land? It's a little bit everybody than the way it sounds, huh?
We've seen an uptick. We generally say the market's typically driven in most areas by the local buyer, by the farmer. That land across the road has an intrinsic value that you can't quantify. So, but we are seeing more investor-driven influences. There again, it's a neighborhood thing. Land sale 2 weeks ago down by Herban, Minnesota, all local influences, all neighboring landowners. It just kind of depends on where you're at. Sometimes here in the Red River Valley, it has this mystique amongst investors, some of them from out of the area. At periods of time, and now is one of them, we see increased investor interest in Red River Valley land. So
that sale was clearly an opportunity type sale. There really hadn't been a public sale of farmland through an auction method that we used. And in that area for probably, 5, 6 years, 4 or 5 years. And you could tell there was pent up demand for land purchases.
Are some types of land selling better than others, or is it all the same?
Everything is strong right now, but I mean, certainly the highest quality land, I mean, we've seen some astronomical results on those. I've seen certainly average or better land is what everyone wants. We do see sales of below average land that sell surprisingly strong, but we've also seen some results that are certainly not at the levels in terms of increases of the higher quality land. I mean, and even when we talk the Red River Valley, especially people that live outside the Red River Valley, they have a perception that every acre in the Red River Valley is, of top-notch quality, and there's variations within that. So certainly the best land, and that's one thing too that I think we saw in the last marketing cycle is we saw a lot of higher quality land available for sale. Certainly we go through periods of time where you don't have it's medium, it's lower quality. So I think that's another thing in this area that we saw is a lot of high quality land offered on the market.
Improvements on the ground, in effect, tile or irrigation, make a difference too, or not?
Drain tile, still is a relatively new thing in the area. At any point in time, there's not a lot of activity of drain tile land. We haven't had any activity in this area, to my knowledge, real recently. Tile, it just goes down to the drainage, and that's, especially in the flatter ground, that's key, drainage, whether it's tile or whether it's natural drainage. Irrigation is such a niche market in this area, as opposed to you get in eastern Nebraska, for example. I mean, everything is irrigated there. Here, we have such small pockets of irrigated land. So, and I would say along those lines too, irrigated land, from an investor standpoint, they don't want to deal with those improvements and the maintenance of those improvements. So that's always interesting dealing with the irrigated land, because that's kind of like off on this. It's never like if dry land is this, irrigated is this. It doesn't necessarily work that way. And then if you've got potato land, which is getting to be a smaller and smaller niche, that is a whole nother realm and influence that's a topic unto itself.
Sure.
Right.
Are you seeing in what you're doing as far as the farm management end of it, are you seeing more interest or even just more cover crops in general?
I'd say, yeah, there's still a lot of learning, a lot of practices being tried and implemented. Not large scale from what I've experienced, but just what works for each operation and where you're at is different, from one area to the next. Even within townships and within counties, the quality and characteristics of the land are different. So what one might be using in Wilkin County, Minnesota, is a different practice of one in Trail County, North Dakota, for example. But yeah, the good thing that I've seen in operators that I've worked with is they're doing something. They're trying different things. Cover crop and sugar beets has been one that's been ongoing for a number of years. This spring that shined, with the strong winds that we had. But yeah, certainly, those high saline salt areas, there's been some cover crops that have been implemented, I guess, cereal rye flown into standing corn in September. Every year is different. We have something we take away from it and learn from it, and so we're certainly analyzing that. So.
How about weed control? Is that making an impact? Especially with the water hemp and the
It certainly does. That's one thing that, this year was a big challenge. Some areas we had thinner stands and the weed pressure increased later in the growing season. So, and just with a shorter growing season in general, it was more of a challenge. So, it's certainly something that we, try to stay on top of. And while this year maybe wasn't perfect in some scenarios, obviously try to improve on it next year. So. One thing I noticed is a lot more pre-emerge herbicides being put on in crops this year, just buying them a little bit of time for that first post-application. So,
yeah, and each season is different. We were so late this spring, I'm guessing they try anything they could do. Crop insurance, those payments, are they impacting what's happening?
Well, I think certainly since we saw crop insurance change, I don't know the exact time it was, say a decade or two ago, it's kind of put a floor under that that amount of revenue that a producer can have certainly has given them more comfort in bidding out rents or bidding up land as well, knowing that their income is going to be a guarantee at a certain level. So yeah, I'd say, things like crop insurance have certainly held up land prices.
I think that's something different now compared to 10 years ago as well. I was in crop insurance about 25 years ago. And, 10 years ago, I think there was some holding back, and everyone talks about the 80s. And, people were wondering, okay, are the land values going to drop in half? Well, I think we found out that crop insurance and other things, like Dale said, help keep a floor. And we've been through that cycle now, so I think that's aiding a little bit of confidence in today's market and the strength that we're seeing.
Yep. Do you see a change in like acreages, farm sizes, locations to cities versus towns? Is that an impact as well or not?
From what I've seen this last run-up in the land sales side of it, certainly the bigger chunks are going almost at a premium. I think if people are we're more mobile than we used to be. You used to buy land that was within 2 to 5 miles of your operation, and now we're driving 20 to 30 miles. And certainly if I'm going to drive that far, if I can purchase or rent a section or two rather than an 80 or a quarter, it's worth my time to do that. So interestingly, at the Herman sale a couple weeks ago, the parcel that had the largest amount of deeded acres sold for the highest amount.
Okay. Again, if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand. We'll get a microphone to you. I want to touch on that a little bit too. When you start seeing those types of acreages go out, is there an optimum size?
I think that's more neighborhood driven, honestly, and who your adjoining farmers are. Again, just dealt with a listing yesterday where they were going to carve off a 40-acre chunk and sell it privately to the neighbor because it would fill out a quarter section for him. They decided not to do that, but there's some strategies when you're marketing land as to, should we do that? Should we market a 40? But really the only interested buyer in that might just be the neighbor, so it was probably better to market that with the additional land. But optimum size, I tell you what, anywhere from a quarter to a section, if it's square, doesn't have a lot of bends in it, it's got good drainage, good soil composition, it's going to go extremely high.
Okay. How about proximity to livestock units and those type of things?
I'd say we don't see that influence here. I don't feel. I mean, I think that's more of an Iowa thing. And
Yeah.
you've got more livestock, and you'll get, I know the story. I don't know how many years. Two neighboring farmers competing and paying $20,000 an acre. Now that's old news. But the impetus of that was they each had livestock and needed acreage in which to put their manure. Around here we just don't have the livestock presence. It is what it is. It's so I don't feel we have that significantly.
Do you see more people looking for land, less people? Is the change in investors making a difference?
More demand than supply.
And that's what you want in a market. Farmland is a true supply-demand market, which I really enjoy. But yeah, right now it seems like when you open up the paper, you open up the internet sites that, oh my gosh, there's tons of land for sale. But in the whole perspective of how many acres there are, there really isn't a lot of land that turns over. I think and we've been saying this for years, we're at that point of the next generation that is inheriting land that maybe wants to hold it. They hold it for a couple of years, find out that maybe a couple things. It's not easy to own land with 6 other brothers and sisters. You're all at different stages of your life. And second of all, maybe they were getting well below the market rent, and they don't know how to approach getting more rent, so it might be just easier to sell it. And you see that.
Certainly, Randy, if I can just jump in with a question. You talk about, we know interest rates where they're going, but that last marketing session talked about what's happening in the world economic markets and those kind of things. Does land become kind of that safe haven for a lot of us when we're in a time of a lot of volatility?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, like Dale mentioned, hedging against inflation. I mean, we've had certain people tell us that directly. That's their strategy. So, and how interest rates, like in the seminar previous to this, right now we're not seeing it impact, and we're not anticipating it impacting land values locally. But ultimately, yeah, it will at some point in the future. It starts getting to be when you translate those interest rates times the dollars we're talking, it's more than lunch, is what that it's going up. So,
Well, certainly for us that were adults in the 80s, we remember the teens interest rates. And I think some of these buyers that are even older than I am, the current interest rates maybe don't scare them quite as much, even knowing that it could have an effect. But to Kyle's point, what was land selling for? I look back where I grew up by Langdon, North Dakota. You were buying land for $150, $200 an acre. Well, if you had a nice piece of land up there right now, it'd be between $4,000 and $5,000. So interest rate does have to have eventually an effect on that. Question?
who wants to take that one?
Go ahead.
Well, obviously, we all know that he bought some land, so that by definition is an influence, but not a significant influence. Yeah, I can tell you that.
Well, I mean, you look at that sale, and I don't know if it was brokered at all. I think it was a privately negotiated sale. So did it take away from another person buying that land? We don't know. I mean, again, in the whole scheme of things, that amount of acres is relatively small compared to the amount of acres that we have in the entire state. And people ask me, well, how do you feel about that? And obviously, North Dakota has anti-corporate farming, but if there's avenues in place that our legislature and our government has put in, I guess it is what it is. I mean, if we don't like it, we need to contact the people who can change it.
Yep, but in other words, it really didn't have an impact on land prices.
No.
I considered the sale was probably below market at the time it closed.
Yeah,
I think the sellers left money on the table.
Yeah, that sale was negotiated quite a while before it ultimately closed. So,
Is there a better time than others to be selling land?
I think we always used to say between now and spring, but there's been tons of sales activity over the summer. So I think we're beyond that, and especially with the internet age we're in. There used to be a concern over the timing that we'd have a sale. They're going to be in the middle of harvesting this crop or that crop. And I think with the internet auction, internet bidding format, it's kind of out the window, because we've sold land to people that they are literally in their tractor or combine when they're bidding.
They're on their smartphone. I mean, all you have to do is go to our website and hit the sale that you want to bid on and start. You can be driving down the field bidding. So that's really changed. In the day when we did a lot of in-person auctions, you had to be at the auction facility at, say, 10 o'clock in the morning on that particular day, whereas now we open it up for a couple of days. If you forget to bid on one day, you can bid on the other day, and you don't have to sit across and look at your neighbor when you're bidding at them. You can push the button, and no one knows who the ultimate buyer is until the deed shows up in the courthouse.
Does that impact, have you seen that impact sales in the past where nobody wanted to bid on a piece of ground maybe because it was the neighbor or somebody you see in church? Or
Absolutely. And that's where the online option just creates more of a true result. Yep. I have friends that farm, and flat out tell me, there's 15 or 20 people that I would never bid against directly. But, I give this scenario, if I end up bidding against my neighbor and bidding him up and don't get it, I've A, made him mad, and B, I didn't get the land. And if I get the land, then I'll deal with the neighbor. But, so the online part kind of opens it up, and I think gets rid of some of those anomalies that can happen in that scenario that we had to deal with in the past. So, but it also creates some anomalies in another direction with chaotic results, like I said. So.
And it certainly opens it up to the world, right? I mean, one of the last sales I had bidders from Texas, I had bidders from Illinois, I had bidders from Iowa, I had bidders from California. Not saying they always buy, but I tend to vet them a little bit and call them and see what their purpose is. And there's people from all over the U.S. that are looking to buy farmland as a hedge against inflation.
Do you have any idea on the percentage of land sales that are done, say, online? Ballpark?
I would say at our company right now, I would say it's a good 90%.
Oh, really?
Are either, because we'll do both, obviously simulcast, anything that's a live auction is also simulcast online. And you get a good mixture of online bidding and in-person bidding at a live event. So, it's pretty rare that we have a conventional listing where we put a price on it, because that's the question I ask back to a potential seller is, what are you thinking? And of course they ask me, what do you think it should go for? In today's market, we can't be spot on. I think the only way you can absolutely know what that land's worth on that particular day is to go through an auction type method.
Fluctuates that much within weeks.
Well, fluctuates
Days.
that much
Yeah.
just within areas.
Yeah.
I mean, literally in the Herman sale again, we had 8,600 a deeded acre, and a half mile away we had 3,400 a deeded acre. Granted, the 3,400 an acre had over half the acres were in CRP, but the other half was sugar beet land. So big variation there.
I think company-wide, Kyle and I were talking about this, but year over year, we've seen a 50% increase in land being sold using our auction method, our auction process, so.
Especially in this area, we haven't always used auctions. It just depends on, obviously an auction, you need more than one person that wants to buy it. Sometimes your market in an area thins out, and we use other methods to maximize, results. But right now, in most cases, auction, there's exceptions to that. There's always exceptions. I've got 80 acres for sale along the interstate south of Fargo. I don't think selling that by auction is a real, that's priced per square foot. So
Yeah.
you list that for a price, for example. But it's 80 acres of farmland, so.
We can guess into it. All depends on what the seller is comfortable with too, right?
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, we work for the seller. And what the seller wants, we're going to accommodate. We can advise and give our opinions on what works best. But again, at the end of the day, he's the landowner, he's the client. We're here to make that happen for him.
Is there still interest in recreational land? A couple years ago, we had talked about recreational land.
That's one thing that it's been pretty steady for quite a while, because when you're talking recreational land, there's usually not a lot of income there. So you're not being able to make the payments based on what the land's producing. So it's been pretty steady, although I would say in the last year, we've seen some sales of wooded land in key areas through the roof compared to historical. So finally, after a number of years, seeing that change. How long that'll last, I don't know. But like I said, because it's usually there's not a lot of income to help pay for that asset.
I know you three aren't the ones necessarily selling or working on the beach shares and those kind of things, but have we started that season yet for Crystal stock?
Yeah, I just noticed there's been a few sales out there so far at $4,300 a share. Not a lot of sales, but it's that time of year where a few people, before the main campaign starts, they'll put some shares out for sale. I see there's some listed $4,300 to $4,500, and some have sold at $4,300.
Speaking of that, rental values, Is it still tracking pretty much the land sales?
Yeah, so for 2022, rental rates did increase as a result of higher grain prices and strong land values, but they didn't increase at the same degree or the same extent that land values went up. And I guess our outlook for 2023 is with continued strong grain prices and land values, we continue to see upward pressure on rents for 23. And I think a lot of it is timing of when you negotiate on those lease terms. I'm leasing farms right now. We'll be doing that for the next couple of months and wrapping things up by the end of the year. If we go back a year, we saw our spring highs, in April and May. So I think from the landowner's perspective, they're looking at maybe wanting to capitalize on some of where that was last spring, which is where we're at today with the news yesterday in the report. So I do ultimately think there'll be upward pressure. Now what that'll be will vary from farm to farm. Maybe it's a 5% increase. Maybe we'll see a 10% adjustment or maybe more than that. I've got probably half of my farm management portfolio are on 1-year leases. The other half is on 2-year leases. So those 2-year leases that are coming up this fall, probably going to be a little bigger adjustment for them, but we've got a lot has happened over those 2 years. We're in different times, different market today. So we'll sit down with our client, go over their goals, analyze the different lease options, revisit what their goals of ownership are, and what their appetite is for risk and what they want to do, and give them our recommendation. And at the end of the day, we'll go out and represent them as best we can in that lease negotiation.
Are there some things, if we're going to look at leasing some land out or renegotiating, are there some clauses and things that we need to be mindful of?
Certainly. I think for a lot of the area I cover, a work back or tillage clause at the end of the year, I have in every one of my leases, or at least language that addresses it. Maybe there's a new operator on it recently and they received it as corn stalks. That's got to be addressed and worked through and common ground found on how it's going to be left when they're done at the end of the year or done with it at the end of the day, I guess. Certainly, soil test products being applied to the farm, fertilizer application records, chemical application records, certainly things like that the landowner should be monitoring to make sure that adequate stewardship is being done. And we can bring that to the table. I mean, it's what we do. We manage a lot of different lease types. We're involved with, going to plot tours and visiting with the seed salesman and going through the different varieties and requesting soil tests and things like that. But certainly I think those are some of your basics, requiring a copy of a fertility test at the end of the year, herbicide information, any insecticide information that was applied, and production yield information. I've got a lot of clients that want to know how did my farm produce this year? I've got calls already and we're not even harvesting yet, They remember last year and how early a harvest we had. So, things like that. Also, I think a big thing of what we've seen the industry move to is the timing of the rent payment. A lot of my leases, the rent's due up front in the spring on March 1st. There may be leases out there today. I know there are between folks that are split payments, but there's certainly risk involved with that as long as they're aware of it. But those are kind of the highlights of what I can think of.
Flex lease is still an option too, or not?
They are. They're as popular as they've always been. I mean, they address a lot of the volatility that we've seen, in the last year or two. However, in that same breath, I will say it's not for every farmer and it's not a fit for every landowner. But it's when you've got both of them willing to understand the concept of it and and be involved with it where we really see those work well.
Let's talk a little bit about appraisals. How do you appraise farmland with this market fluctuating like it has been?
I had a thought in my head that wasn't very right. I was going to say throw a dart, but I better not say that. I'm a professional. It's tough, especially, because we do different types of appraisals. And certainly when I work a lot with estate appraisals. So I'm looking backwards. So maybe someone has passed away in July of this year, and I'm just getting the appraisal request. So I have to put on my blinders that I don't know what happened from July to current, although I do know what's happened. So it maybe influences me to be at, whether prices are up or down a certain level. Certainly lending has been interesting because, like we said earlier, sometimes we think we've seen the high in sales, and we see another one that's higher. What comparable do you use to show that's going to appraise out at that level? So it's been challenging on the appraisal side.
Certainly as appraisers, we're not predictors of the future. All we can do is deal with what we know now and previous. So, and certainly we're not seeing the same rates of increase in all areas. So to make that assumption, just because some sale over here showed a 40% increase, how big of an area do you apply that to? So,
for instance, you look at the sale that was up just north of Hillsboro earlier this year at $10,000 a tillable acre. Does that mean that every acre of tillable land around Hillsboro is worth $10,000 an acre? My opinion, which an appraisal is no, because we had similar land right by there that sold for a little over $7,000, same public venue. So, we had certain market influences and a person wanting to buy that maybe wasn't motivated at the other sale. So, again, we can't predict the future, but certainly can't also say that one sale makes a whole market.
Is it mostly you're looking at estates for the purpose of the appraisal, or are there other purposes as well?
Well, it comes to all different times. My particular portfolio is a lot of estate work. I would say Kyle does more lending work than I do. I do my share of lending work. In the last couple of years, we've really seen a really big increase in gifting appraisals. We've got that generation that wants to gift the asset to the next generation. They need to know what that is for tax purposes. So we've seen a lot of work with gifting as well.
certainly a lot of uptick in calls. I've gotten people wanting an appraisal to have some knowledge because they intend to sell, whether it's to their tenant or whatever it might be. And in some cases, those come with a disclaimer on my part, especially in areas where there hasn't been any public sales activity. Just I kind of make them aware of what's been going on. But yeah, I've seen an uptick in that amount of inquiry.
Yeah, I was going to say I've worked with both these guys. I've got farm management clients where there's maybe multiple siblings involved, and one of them has gotten to the stage in their life where they're like, I want out. There's another opportunity for me elsewhere. I'd like to dissolve my interest in the farmland. And so oftentimes those can be pretty in-depth conversations and assignments. And we walk through it with them, and we can advise them on what we see in the industry and what's commonly done and give them our recommendation. And I think that provides them with a lot of peace of mind and comfort in knowing that everyone's getting a fair deal here.
Do you still see a lot of, I was just thinking how rapidly Fargo seems to be growing off to the south, 1031 exchanges, that's still an issue or not?
Well, in the South Fargo and the Fargo area with the FM diversion, we see the 1033 exchange, in which their lands were utilized for the FM diversion, so they'd have 3 years to reinvest that money. I think there's still influence in that pretty dramatically. We just listed some land south of Highway 46 yesterday, and I think there will be a lot of buyout people from the diversion as well as local farmers that will be very interested in that because it'll be outside of that holdback area.
Another thing with that too, with FM diversion, and it's not just that, but farmsteads being displaced or rural residents being displaced. What we've seen in the last year is a tremendous uptick in that 5 acre, 10 acre, where there's no buildings or minimal buildings, for somebody to put a house on. We used to kind of see a ceiling for that, maybe let's say it was 100,000 or so. We've seen market activity that blows way past that, so that's an interesting kind of phenomenon.
Is that all because of the FM diversion project?
I think that's exacerbating it, but it was happening. I mean, just people wanting to live in the country, certainly having an established tree shelter belt that might take you 20 years to grow. If it's already there, that's an appealing thing. Proximity to rural water, proximity to electricity, those are major factors too, because obviously those can be significant expenses.
I suppose connectivity too with that.
I mean, Kyle, we saw, a 13 acre site within 10 miles of West Fargo sell for over $500,000. And it had some older buildings on it, and they tore them all down to start over.
Yeah, wow.
So
That would be what I'd call an outlier, but still.
that one was
Yeah.
an outlier, but
I mean, it
happened.
happened, and can't say it wouldn't happen again if
Yeah.
it's- today's market conditions are stronger than then, in consideration of people being bought out for the FM diversion. So.
That kind of ties into with, if there's other buildings, outbuildings, bins, grain leg, those things, that make a difference too?
Well, that's a different buyer. Certainly in the last several years, we've seen a lot of activity. The key is how modern is it? The reality is with agricultural outbuildings, there's a limited market for that. And, if you put up a $2 million grain facility, I'm sorry to break it to you, but it's not worth $2 million. Until at a certain point in the future where the cost to build that is $5 million, maybe, let's say. So, but certainly grain handling facilities, we've seen more activity because that's where you can make money, saving costs on paying the elevator to dry, storing it yourself, creating more marketing opportunities for yourself. So, and a key with that is accessibility. Certainly seeing more operators keenly aware of location, and they'll maybe build a grain facility that's separate from their other ag buildings, and that's a very wise decision because you can market that separately. Because there you certainly do see a threshold. If you've got that fifth and sixth machine sheds, are those worth what you spent on them, for example? Grain facility, I mean, a little different animal, but certainly there too, I've seen some that are beyond the scope and the needs of a typical farmer. 1 million bushels, for example. Well, how many farmers in that area need 1 million bushels of storage or something like that? So those factors are at play, and what we consider when we appraise stuff.
I just have this one popped just in my head here. School district, does that have an influence?
I have never seen that be an influence. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I've not directly seen that, but maybe Kyle,
At
you
times.
have.
Locally here, there was a time Rothsay built a new school and their taxes doubled. And there was a small window there where we saw it in the land values there. Another one at times is the Moorhead School District. Because, they've had some, there again, you go from other close by neighborhoods that are looking at $20 an acre taxes and, they've got 40 to 50, for example. But it generally speaking, it has less of an impact than you think. I've appraised stuff through the years, and it's like, wow, that's got huge taxes on it for whatever. It might be a drain assessment that's really, and assuming it's good land, it just kind of, if in a thin market, it can make a bigger deal because, it just does. But generally, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but we've seen windows of where it does.
Yep. You talked a little bit about the crystal stock. Any other stocks, other co-ops selling, moving?
There again, none of us are stock guys, but the ethanol stocks are as hot as they've been in 5 years. So you're just looking at the dividends they're paying out, the profit margins, and those sorts of things. So the ethanol activity has been very strong.
Okay. Well, as we start beginning to wrap up here, any other factors that landowners should be mindful of?
Well, I think the major points of emphasis we're talking about here are long-term land ownership, so land management and managing that relationship, and buying land and selling land. So we're going to kind of divvy this up. Each of them has their own factors, but as far as buying land, I think it's realizing what's influencing the market at that time. And right now, as I mentioned, it's an opportunity-driven market. There's not deals out there, generally speaking, and I don't think it's getting on the train because next year it's going to be worth more and the next year more. So I think from a buyer standpoint, it's realizing that and realizing that's what you're up against and trying to evaluate yourself, what's that worth to me, and what can I financially swing to not jeopardize my future? And that's the factor right now, I think, to be aware of.
On the seller's point of that, I always look at opportunity as a seller, because that's who we deal with land sales. And it's a seller's market right now. Land prices are extremely high. I think there's just a lot of landowners that are at a point in their life that don't really monitor what their rate of return on their asset is. And if they did, it would almost scare them that their net return on that land is 1% or less, in some of these areas where the rental rates shouldn't be or aren't where they should be. But I hear time and time again that a landowner will say, I'm worried about paying capital gains. And it's always easy for people to spend other people's money, right? But in my opinion, you got capital gains rates that are still low, and they have been historically low for a long time. You've got a 15%, possibly 20% capital gain on an asset that's probably went up 5, 6, 7-fold. I always say there's good problems and bad problems. Paying capital gains, in my opinion, is a good problem to have. So I'd say for landowners, take a really serious look at what, at the end of the day, what your cash rent, by the time you pay income tax on that and pay your real estate tax, what is your true net return on what that land could sell for?
Anybody else have any final questions? There's a question out here.
I hear 20 and 30-year-olds saying, it doesn't matter what I pay for it. Interest rates are low. And should I just get a little down payment and I'm good? Boy, that scares the hell out of me. I lived in the 80s, okay? Yet the guys that pay the most are usually mature guys like me, but not always. I would call them kids because I got kids that age. But they understand it's all about cash flow and working capital. And I just cannot imagine when interest rates go from, we got like at 3% a couple of years ago to 15%. Imagine if you owe $1 million.
Economics and logic would tell you you're exactly right. The problem, or the issue is there's a lot of cash in the pocket. And there's demand and optimism that it's always going to be good, right? We tend to be optimistic about, commodity prices will stay strong, I'll get these yields. In fact, I'll get higher yields. And so the interest payment I'm paying is probably not the higher consideration that they should be thinking about. So they're thinking about the opportunity to purchase that land when it becomes available that hasn't been available for 6, 7, maybe 10 decades. It's never been available in their life, and maybe not even their father's life. So do I take the opportunity to purchase it and wrap it into my entire package of farmland? Because I hear time and time again, well, that quarter of that parcel will never cash flow. I don't know when farmland has ever cash flowed on itself. It's always been part of a bigger piece of the entire farm operation.
That's because nobody had any cash.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it can happen. We always say, but it is different this time. I mean, we have these black swan events of Ukraine, of COVID. I mean, we just can't predict those. And certainly, I don't know in the 80s if we could have predicted that better or not. I don't know. But certainly, I don't ever see, I'm going on a limb, the interest rates going that high again. I don't see our government allowing that to happen.
Question back here.
Where does the contract for deed fit into the long-term plan as far as a young man or a seller in this climate, you know? Where does that sit in?
You know, I think the contract for deed is usually in a market where the land isn't selling very well, so the seller then is at the point of making concessions to that buyer. When you're in an up market like we're in, and there's still lots of cash being held by the buyers, and lenders are more than willing to borrow it, most sellers want their cash up front. So some sellers would like to utilize a contract for deed and use that payment as like an annuity for a period of years. I understand that as well. You know, we do have sales with contract for deed. They're not very common.
And usually very short term, you know, splitting over a couple of years or something. Otherwise, I mean, you're acting as a bank, you know, so do you want to accept that risk? And it depends on the relationships of the parties then. Oh, yep,
There's also some tax implications there too, isn't there?
yeah.
Back here again.
On the seller selling it, with the tax implication of getting that big chunk of money versus spreading it out and, you know, being fully hearted of believing that this guy over here is going to fulfill it, isn't there some pluses in just trying to maybe help, not only help yourself, but maybe help them too? Or is that, like you said, it's very few, but is there, in the whole scheme of the cost to the seller, you know what I mean?
Most sellers are selling because they want cash, need cash possibly. So that becomes the driving factor of selling land. If they were financially set or didn't have a purpose for that money that they're going to get from that, yeah, they'd probably be more open to a contract for deed and a smaller payment. But in a hot market, quite frankly, you could argue that they should get above market price for it because they're taking the risk as being the bank.
Yeah, in a steady market, you got one set of considerations, but you know the market could do this, it could do that, and you know how do you as a seller feel about that?
Yep. We're about out of time here this afternoon. We've got another seminar coming up here shortly. You guys be around in case somebody has any questions to visit with you personally afterwards?
Certainly.
Yep. And we're in the Livestock building, two buildings down.
Okay. Very good. Let's give the guys a hand here from Farmers National Company, Kyle Nelson, Dale Weston, and Eric Skolnis.